Hi, my name is Brad Guhr, and I am the Prairie Restoration and Education Coordinator at Dick Arboretum in the Plains in Heston. We are in our native plant landscaping school and pandemic version 2020, and I am presenting the second class of this series called The Best Management Practices of Native Landscaping. And those BMPs are what I'm going to cover in this presentation today. So let's just get right with it. The Dick Arboretum mission is to cultivate transformative relationships between people and the land. And we've been doing that now here for almost 39 years. And when Harold and Evie Dick set out to do this, they had a mission of wanting to share that native plant experience with people in the community. And we've been trying to do that in various levels ever since they put that mission forth. And the kind of ways that I have been doing that since I've been here for about 16 years now have been through, first of all, through my background and graduate work in native plant ecological restoration, larger scale prairies, oak savannas, woodlands, being able to plant and manage and be stewards of those kind of areas. And so we've done that through our restoration work here at Dick Arboretum with landowners out in the South Central Kansas landscape. And so I'm seeing that through the lens of the big ecosystem approach and how we cultivate those transformative relationships with people in the land. I've also been doing that through small-scale gardening, which is going to be more of the topic that we're discussing here with this session. And I've been able to do that for the last almost 15 years with this program called Earth Partnership for Schools, where we train teachers to restore prairie gardens on school grounds. And so they go through this native landscaping process with their students and engage them in the landscape, the history of the landscape, the plants and the animals that are attracted to that natural landscape. And that's been a really rewarding experience here at the Arboretum. We've been able to train nearly 300 teachers in that process and have almost reached about 90 schools now. And so throughout the South Central Kansas region, that is a regular part of my work here, trying to fulfill that mission at the Arboretum as well. Concurrently, I am excited to always landscape at home as well and practice a lot of the things that I'm learning through this process. And but that all comes down to an experience over about kind of 20 years of working with native plants, making plenty of mistakes in this native gardening process, and trying to figure out how to fix those mistakes to be more efficient. And that's what this session is about, trying to pass along some of those, about 11 or so of those best management practices that hopefully can help improve your chance of success as you landscape with native plants. So here we go. The first one that I think is most important to do first is to define the goals of what you're trying to do with your planting. So it can take many different forms. As I showed before with ecological restoration, it could be like something that you see on the far right of this screen, like we've done to restore large acreages of prairie from seed. And basically you put the seeds into the ground and you let the shaping forces of nature take their course. And all the way to the other end of the spectrum, which would be formal manicured horticultural gardening. So, you see this sort of extreme example of the English or French landscapes, but many of those ideals have been passed along into American landscaping ideals that we like to have control over our gardens and, specifics with the water and chemicals and the trimming and all those kinds of things. And so I think what I'm going to try to do with this presentation is to be able to show a happy medium between these. So it's using the native plants from the native ecosystems that we have here, but doing them in more horticultural, purposeful ways, incorporating them into your landscape in ways that are more aesthetically pleasing to the general community and to ourselves as we try to attract pollinators and be good stewards of our landscapes. That's kind of what I'll zero in on. And I'll show examples of what we're doing here at the Arboretum. So this would be taking an element of that native plant community of echinacea, and this looks like it might be Echinacea angustifolia or purpurea, and doing big massive scale plantings of that, and seeing a big wow factor when it blooms during that time of midsummer when it is. And being able to appreciate that for that 2 to 3 week process when that plant is blooming profusely. Here you see another example of that sort of monoculture planting of one species, if you will, in gray-headed coneflower out on our island. And then you see a little bit more complexity, various species being shown here. From some species in the mint family, like catmint you see on the left there, and then you see a big splash of penstemon there on the front of the bed on the right. And being able to do more purposeful sort of horticultural layouts of those particular species, but using the native ones, using the ones that are going to attract the wildlife, and so kind of a mix of the horticultural and the ecological approaches here with these kind of beds. And then here's one that would be a little bit more wild, plantings kind of spread out throughout, a little bit more of a prairie perspective. So a key component is start small. You don't want to start too big, get overwhelmed with your planting, and then receive failure as you do that. So don't try to start with the 1904 World's Fair on a grand scale. We're thinking start small and keep it to a manageable area, because you're going to be working on creating manageable edging. You're going to be keeping those plants alive with your watering. You're going to be weeding to keep that planting looking nice. And so you need to kind of get your native plant landscaping feet under you, start small, make it look nice. You can always expand and make it bigger as you go through time. Preparing the site. You can save yourself a lot of time down the road of this native landscaping process by taking care of one particular species for sure. Weed enemy number one in my book is Bermuda grass. And if you have experience with this and you get a bit of heartburn when you see this species like I do, you know that you want to try to rid your site of that species as much as possible. Another example could be like bindweed. But this one I find particular, Bermuda grass, is really tough to get rid of, and it's really a pain in your landscape when it is there and you're trying to get rid of it. So one of the best ways I know is to start with an herbicide treatment of glyphosate. That's the active ingredient in what used to be called Roundup. It lost their patent on that, or the patent ran out. And so anyway, doing an application or 2 or 3 if it's needed during the warm season months of June through September, when Bermuda grass is growing best and most susceptible to the herbicide, is what I've found to be the most successful for getting rid of it. You can try the non-chemical methods, and I really don't like to use chemicals unless I have to. I don't like the exposure to it. I don't like the environmental use of them. But this is one case where I find if it's used sparingly, judiciously, this can be a very helpful tool in preparing your site and helping keep you from doing a lot of weeding work down the road. One of the things that I have also done, and I feel done in error, is to also try to cultivate a site. I was thinking, oh, let's stir up the soil, let's make it looser so that we have an easier medium to work with when we're doing our plantings. First of all, it wasn't that easy to work in, because the day that we planted this, it rained and it was a big muddy mess, and we had kids just tracking mud all throughout the school. Not a pretty sight. Also, we found that by stirring up the weed seed by cultivating, we had a lot more weed problems than if we would have just sprayed it, left the dead material of the Bermuda there, and then planted into that and using that as basically a mulch. That's what I found after experiencing this, and that's what I would recommend. Do not do cultivation as much as you can, because it does stir up weed seed. Don't disturb the soil, in other words. Hardscape. It's nice to include a hardscape and being able to take those elements, those non-plant elements, and incorporate those into your landscape initially. because they are going to have a higher cost. And if you are on a budget, you want to make sure that you get those out of the way first. And then you'll find that your plants can be sort of a flexible cost. You can do lower planting rates and save money if you need to later on. But doing your hardscape first and then your plants later is how I'd recommend going through that. So having a place to sit, being able to put houses and feeders and water features into your landscape, include signage into your landscape. Those are all helpful things. They're going to cost a little bit more, and it's nice to get that cost up front and out of the way. Tools are not that expensive, but it is also good to start with the right tools. The bottom of the three tools you're seeing there, a planting trowel that's like sort of a cast aluminum type approach, is much stronger and much more effective than the little flimsy metal ones that you've probably seen from a cheap garden center or something like that. So I would definitely recommend the stronger version. I also recommend a weeding tool like a dandelion digger you see there in the middle of the screen. It is very important to have a good weeding tool. A friend introduced to me a few years ago the tool that I think replaces both those, and that's the A.M. Leonard soil knife. And I am on my second one of these now. It's a great tool. It's a planter, it's a weeder, and it has that serrated edge for cutting through roots when you're trying to plant in a particular area as well. I highly recommend the A.M. Leonard soil knife. You can get one for about 20, 25 bucks, and it's a great tool to have in your tool shed for native plant landscaping. It's always great to include art. You don't have to, but I think it really enriches a garden space and adds value, adds complexity, and it makes it a more pleasurable place to be. This is an example of a couple of options that an elementary teacher in Wichita, Peterson Elementary, Erin Dowell, has done these kind of installations with their students, and they're very aesthetically pleasing. Either a wall hanging or a sculpture of some sort. Here's some examples of what we have here at the Arboretum. Limestone sculpture here that you see is one of the nice features that we have. That's a Norman Epp. Here's a Paul Friesen that we have out on our island, another beautiful limestone sculpture. Here is a mix of the clay and hedge posts and steel that we've seen, they're repeated throughout, and Conrad Snyder has provided these as for us, the artist that has done these nice pieces with poetry, and these fencing pieces that are to look weathered, like they're falling down. They simulate the barriers between urban and natural areas, and we're kind of showing that at the Arboretum, those are starting to wither and fall apart through education. So that's kind of the story behind that art piece. We have an artist faculty member at Heston College, Hannah Easton, producing some of these options of sculptures with their students. The Schaefer, Johnson, Cox, and Fry, who built our buildings, are nice aesthetic pieces, kind of architecture art, in addition to the sundial piece that we have in a sitting area outside of our visitor center. Another example. John Miller produced this nice little sitting area. A shelter that has been here since the Arboretum started. A nice favorite place for people to visit. And then our very own Scott Vogt produced this piece out of cedar posts that came off of a prairie management site. We're helping with a landowner and created this gazebo out of the stumps of cedar trees. So get that hardscape into your project figured out. Getting edgy, edging into your landscape has been one of those lessons learned that we learned the hard way. We started putting these gardens into schools. Here's an example at Sunset Elementary in Newton, where the plants were getting established nicely, but they really started looking weedy. It was hard to tell where the planting started and the lawn started, where that transition took place. So even though we were mulching, that boundary between the two really was hard to identify after a while. And so creating some kind of a boundary, you see the before and after there, really helps add aesthetic pleasing nature to it. It helps hold the mulch in place, and then it clearly identifies that boundary where the mowing should stop and the weeding should start. And we found that to be very important to the success of these gardens. Because if you don't, the mower starts getting closer, the mower picks up the mulch and shoots it off, and then the weeds grow there, and the mower keeps getting further and further into the garden, starts mowing over some of your plants. And so it really is hard to not to manage these gardens well if you don't have that boundary well identified. So there is a before and after of another garden, and yet one more before and after for another garden there at Sunset. There are other materials you can use as well. Finding bricks to create that edge. You can lay them out flat, you can stack them up against each other. You can use different pieces of wood. This shows cut up pieces of a pallet. But you could also do something like shake shingles, like cedar shingles would be another option I could think of. You know, who doesn't have down branches from trees in their landscape? Cut up a branch and turn them on their end and create a little boundary similar to the way you would maybe like that, or to create cookies of a particular branch. Or you could lay them horizontally and create longer boundaries between your paths and your gardens. If you want to spend a little bit more money, this is a very durable and long-lasting, aesthetically pleasing version of a metal, like a Core-10 steel that you can pound into the boundary. That is a very nice one that I would like to use more of. But sometimes budgets will say you need to spend less, and just using some kind of the plastic or rubberized material that you can pound into that edge could be a really inexpensive way, but a very clean line as well. So those are some options that you can see of how edging is a very important addition into your arsenal for best management practices. All right, selecting your plants. This is a big one. I'm only going to touch briefly on it. Our Director Scott Vogt just recently did a whole class, our first class on plant selection, and that should be available on our website soon. So if you didn't take that class, you can get a big dose of that from Scott. But I'm just going to touch on some little BMPs that I think that are helpful. One of them is try to figure out what kind of a rate of planting. How close do you want your plants to be together? Sometimes I go with the deluxe version, planting the plants very close, like one plant per square foot, like you see in this planting the city of North Newton. And you can see that on the left, when we put the planting in, got it mulched in nicely, that 6 months later, that planting was well established, filled in all the gaps, took out the weed space, and looked very nice in a hurry. And you can do that with a really dense planting. Sometimes budgets say we want a little more sparse planting. And so what I will more typically go towards will be a planting rate of about 1 plant per 2 to 4 square feet. And if you do that, when a plant comes in at about $4 per plant, as you typically see like at our plant sale, then you have a dollar rate that would be about $1 to $2 per square foot. So that's something to think about, planting rate, as you're looking at plant selection first. Then what kind of plants do I want to put in? And there are 2 big factors that you want to be thinking about. One, what kind of moisture do you have in your landscape? Is it in a low area like you see here, where it might be somewhat of a rain garden setting? It may be an area that catches downspout water, and if it does, you want plants that like their feet wet. And so wetland type plants would be the plant palette that you would choose from the natural systems to put into your landscape. And we have lots of species that fit that bill well. Or it may be more of a mound or a hummock that would be well drained, maybe have a rocky base to it, and would call for more really drought tolerant plants. So it'd be more of a xeriscaping situation where you want plants from, like, say, an open dry prairie area with low rainfall expectations that are going to do well in more drought-like conditions. So know what your water situations are and choose your plants accordingly. Also be thinking about the amount of sunlight that your area is going to get. So is it going to be a pretty full sun area, not a lot of blockage from trees that are casting shade? And also be thinking about the arc of the sun. So when the sun is low in the sky during the winter solstice, you're going to be seeing different sun's rays, and you're going to be getting a lot more shade in like the spring and the fall. but then also be thinking about when the sun is right overhead near the summer solstice. So that may affect that, like on the north side of your house, you're thinking in the spring and fall, oh, I have so much shade here and I really want shade-oriented species, which you will want on the north side of a house, but also be thinking during the middle of the summer when the sun is beating down on that particular location because it is much higher in the sky. So be thinking about the amount of sun exposure and choose plants accordingly on that spectrum of sun shade gradient. You see here a screenshot of our native plant list from our guide on our website that we use for our spring and fall plant sales. You can see in the right column, it addresses the amount of moisture regime that you might be thinking about for these different plants. So it's either wet or it's middle of the road mesic, or it might be dry. And that category will tell you whether the plant fits, where it fits on that moisture spectrum. The second column in from the right is the amount of sun exposure. So is it full sun? Is it full shade? Is it somewhere in between? That category is going to tell you that as well. Also be thinking about how you may want your plants to represent many different seasons of interest. You want spring, you want summer, you want fall. And so be thinking about when that plant is going to have interest, when it's going to be blooming, when it's going to have nice fall color. And that column will tell you more about that plant and when it really shines. Think about the height of the plant. We're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit more, but typically you don't want really tall plants obscuring really short plants. So keep that in mind too as you're selecting your plants. And also it's always nice to have a variety of colors in your landscape. Or you may have a particular theme, like I want a yellow garden. Keep those things in mind, all different variables as you're choosing your plants, and make sure when you've defined what you want, you know what you're getting with your plants, and that's going to help you with your success as you consider that particular best management practice. So just a few examples of some things you might consider. Being able to choose plants in clumps or waves helps give that plant a little bit more wow factor if you're seeing that feature really shine in a bigger clump of plants of 3s or 5s or 7s. So that's a nice feature that you see there in that. Also be thinking about the height. Here's an example of a bed that may be about 8 to 10 feet wide. The landscape architecture principle kind of tells us that we don't want the height of the plants to be more than half the width of that garden. So let's say that's 10 feet wide there. We wouldn't want those plants to be more than about 5 or 4 feet tall in the middle. Just one of those principles we kind of generally follow. Here's another example. You might consider alternating a couple of species that do really well next to each other. So in the front of this particular example, you see echinacea and penstemon interspersing with each other. They might be blooming around the same time, but it's a really eye-catching front of that garden. And then you see in the back of the garden an alternation of switchgrass and purple baptisia. And so there you see a nice alternating of color and textures, seeing that arrangement as well, with some splashes of color with your agastache on the sides and your goldenrod in the middle and so forth. And just one final example, thinking about height. You have here tall grasses up against the foundation of the house. You don't want those in the front where they'd be obscuring the other plants, and in the front you see things like little blue stem and some of the penstemons that are going to be shorter, and like some of the shorter grasses there as well. Another best management practice, careful watering. It doesn't make sense putting all the effort into these plants if we're not going to make sure we take care of them and see them through to have success. So when you get these plants, taking them away from our plant sale, they have really small root systems and bound up in these pots. And so we need to give them time to develop these deep root systems that they are eventually going to develop. Those 6, 8, 10, 12-foot deep root systems that are going to make them really resistant to drought and very sustainable in the landscape for years, if not even decades. But it takes time to grow those deep root systems. And in the meantime, until they get there, are very susceptible to drought and heat that we experience here in Kansas. So you have to treat that plant like it's still in a pot, and you have to water it a little bit very frequently early on, and then as it develops that root system, the frequency can slow down and the deeper watering can take place. But early on, it needs to be short waterings, very frequent, because you have to have that to get those plants established initially, to get that nice bed that is going to be able to be really drought tolerant in the long run. So water frequently, and monitor the stress of the plants. You can kind of see them give those signs that they're not doing well. And so keep an eye on that and check regularly as you try to get those plants through that first year or two of establishment. Other things to think about with water, since you are going to be watering a lot, make sure you have a good spigot handy and sufficient hosing. And then also be thinking about downspouts more as an issue of a problem. If you want to create a rain garden, then go ahead and create it next to your downspouts. That can be helpful. But if you are using mulch and you have surface water running through and carrying that mulch away, it can be a pain. So you may want to plan around or not put them in front of spouts, or be able to create like a dry riverbed of rock or something like that to carry that water through. But keep that in mind as you're siting your gardens. The next one is to not fertilize. These native plants out in the landscape with those deep roots do just fine in dry, rocky soils, not a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus in the top layer that they're dealing with. And so you don't need to fertilize these plants. In fact, if you take them out of that setting and bring them into this urban landscape with rich soils where they're getting lots of moisture, sometimes they'll grow 2 to 3 times the height that they would out in their natural setting. So you get, like, say, a small, nice little short in stature penstemon or an echinacea that looks great out in the prairie, and you get it into your landscape and you give it too much nutrients and too much water, and all of a sudden it gets really tall and leggy and falls over, and it's not as aesthetically pleasing. The other thing that you're doing by feeding fertilizer into those areas is, and you're only feeding that top surface area of the soil where the annual weeds like to hang out. And so you're mostly feeding the plants that you don't want to do well when you add that. So keep fertilizer out of the garden. Adding mulch. This is a really important pest management practice. Whether you're trying to conserve moisture, as we're trying to establish these plants in those first couple of years, that's a very important time for helping conserve some of the moisture and giving you a little bit more wiggle room in your air when it comes to watering. Or you're trying to keep weeds from establishing in that space in between your plants while they get established. Mulch to the layer of 1 to 2 to 3 inches can be a very useful tool at conserving water and keeping weeds out and keeping these native plant gardens looking nice and purposeful. And so getting mulch in there on a regular basis, and you can buy that from a garden center and bring it in bags if you don't mind spending the money, or you can go to, oftentimes municipalities will have a free mulch pile where they grind up their limbs and trees and so forth. And that's what I like to do. And when I'm doing that, I like to have certain mulching tools that I'm just going to review here that's really good to have in your shed as you're keeping mulch on your native garden site. So a good silage fork, the mini-tined large surface area silage fork is an amazing tool and a must-have for doing regular mulching on your sites. And by regular, I'm meaning like at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. I will at least mulch in the spring or the fall, or sometimes both, to keep a nice looking garden. But that silage fork, in addition to a 4-tined rake, is really nice for getting the mulch out of the pickup and being able to help spread it out in a particular area. And I should say, with a silage fork, it's with that kind of surface area when you're picking up the mulch, it's so easy to fill a pickup quickly with one of those. And then also to help, if you can't get the pickup right into your garden where you're going, to be able to have a couple of 5-gallon buckets handy to where you can fill those buckets and carry it in and with precision drop the mulch into the areas where you're wanting to get them. So a big thumbs up on those 3 tools right there. Tools that you may have in your shed that you think are useful that I haven't found very helpful at all, like a spade fork that's like a potato fork or a pitchfork. I haven't found those to be very helpful. I've also haven't found like a scoop shovel or a snow shovel to be very helpful either. It's just hard to pick up the mulch well, with that kind of a tool. So thumbs down on those two options. Consider the former rather than the latter. Another thing that is really helpful for keeping those weeds down and conserving that moisture in the first year as you get your plants established and get that mulch out there, put a couple of layers of newspaper down. This is a great way to prevent weeds from coming in, and as they decompose over that first year, it helps buy you some time before you have to really start doing that weeding. So I found mulching with newspapers to be a helpful tool as well. Signage, especially if you have a native garden that is very visible to the public, it's helpful to help tell the story for why you're landscaping with natives. Sometimes native landscaping can look a little bit unsightly, or people will think a little bit messy. So to help tell that story, put in some signage to help make it look purposeful, to help tell why you're doing that. And it helps increase acceptance for the neighborhood, especially in places where you might have like landscaping covenants or something like that that don't look kindly on taller vegetation or a little bit more wild native looking vegetation. So this is one that I just found when if you Googled native plant signage. Here's a very nice, simple, I'm sure low-cost version on Etsy, pollinator-friendly garden. And then some of the more established organizations that promote native landscaping, like the Xerces Society. This is a commonly seen pollinator habitat sign that I like to see. Monarch Way Station site, if you meet the Monarch Watch certain parameters that they have in a way station site, and they'll send you this attractive little sign to put up there. And then another one we've seen a lot of comes from the National Wildlife Foundation, a certified wildlife habitat site. So if you meet certain criteria of food, water cover, and places to raise wildlife, then that's a nice sign to have in there as well. So just a couple of examples you might consider as you help tell the story for why you're doing your native landscaping. And I'll finish with the last one that is so important, and it is very important to the longevity and sustainability of a good garden, is to have weeding be a regular part of your routine. So getting out there regularly, removing the plants that are, so a weed is identified as a plant out of place. And so if you put in your native plants and you have other plants coming in, like some of the annuals and biennial weeds, you want to keep those out of there to keep it looking nice and to keep it appealing to the neighbors as well. So here are a few weeding tips that I have. Getting in there regularly is important. You don't want it to be something that happens only once every couple of months, because then it's going to be a huge chore. You're going to be overrun. It's backbreaking work, and it takes a lot of time at that setting, and you're not having any fun. But if you get out there regularly and just spend a couple of minutes, every week or even every day. It's something I like to get into my garden after work or early in the morning or in the evenings to see what's there and just pull a few weeds. And as you get out there, you're seeing things happening. You're learning more about the flowers or the seeds that are setting on, or the pollinators that are visiting your plants, or the host plants that are hosting what kind of caterpillars. All very engaging elements and weeding gets you out in there to enjoy your native garden in that way. When you're pulling that plant, try to get the root so that you don't have to come back to it and pull it again. And as you do that, try to minimize the amount of soil disturbance that you'd have. If you disturb a big part of the soil, like you pull up a big root wad and you stir up a bunch of weed seed, then you're going to kind of encourage more weed problems rather than less. So try to either step on around the plant or hold one hand around it as you pull it out. Try to keep that soil in place as you're pulling that weed. And if it makes it easier, like those annuals get really big and you don't want to have to, and it's backbreaking work, consider, especially if it's right before it's flowering, go ahead and just cut it off at the base. And if it's an annual, it may not come back and flower and set seed at all. And since it's an annual, it won't live through the year. So that's another thing to consider, and it's a lot easier to just cut that stem than it is to pull it out. But whatever the case, if you do have seed heads out there, make sure that you take those off the area. Some of these annual weeds can create hundreds, if not thousands, of seeds per plant. And if you leave them there, you're just inviting more problems later on. So you can save a lot of headache by removing that plant material off of the area, compost it, throw it in the trash, whatever you might do. But you're going to save yourself headaches down the road if you get those seeds off that garden. And then finally, one of the things to think about for the native plants that you're promoting, you may not like how they look after they're done flowering. They may get kind of tall and rank, or they may get brown and look sort of dead looking. Go ahead and just break the stems off if they get to that point. So if you can, they've got, especially once they've got those deep root systems, they're going to come back fine next year. Just take and pull it at an angle, and then it makes some more space for the other plants around it. That's a tool that I've met that I don't really call it weeding, but kind of selectively removing some of the plant material like weeding to help keep the area looking sightly. So there you have it. There are my 11 best management practices in a nutshell, and I hope that you found something you can take home to help you be more successful in your native landscaping endeavors. Landscaping with native plants, and I'll see you around. Bye-bye.